What is up, everyone? Crunchy Frog here. And throughout video game history, several development studios and publishing studios have garnered industry-wide praise and golden reputations because of their past releases. Studios that produce people's favorite games tend to accumulate a fan base and a following all of their own. Those who enjoyed the previous games tend to put a lot of blind faith into those studios and start to believe that any game they release will, or at least should, be as great as the previous games that they enjoyed. However, in recent years, this blind faith has proved kind of detrimental to some fans who have found themselves at best disappointed and at worst completely betrayed by the quality or lack thereof of their favorite studio's most recent games. Witcher developer CD Projekt Red springs to mind as the most glaring example, with the near ubiquitous critical and consumer praise of The Witcher 3. CDPR suddenly started to gain an almost cult-like following, and honestly for good reason. I mean, they produced what is considered one of the best games of all time, or at least that generation, and as such, fans just started to tie the success of the game to the developers who made it possible. In the eyes of many on the internet, CDPR could do absolutely no wrong. So when their new RPG game was unveiled, Cyberpunk 2077, the masses were instantly convinced that it too would be just an overwhelming success. And that was before any gameplay was even revealed, before anyone had even spent 1 second walking around the streets of Night City, and fans were already utterly convinced that the game would be perfect, because they believed that the developers themselves were perfect. The studio, and by proxy Cyberpunk, had garnered a larger-than-life reputation during the build-up to its release. Some might say expectations were set so high that almost nothing CDPR could have ever released could have possibly matched up to what fans were hoping for. But nonetheless, Cyberpunk released as an abysmal, buggy, lifeless mess, one that garnered lawsuits and refunds and was an industry-wide scandal. For months it became a news sensation and went on to become a cautionary tale for hyping up games prior to their release. But one of the factors most at fault for the hysteria was that aforementioned blind faith the public had placed in CDPR. They figured with the overwhelming success of the Witcher series, everything the studio made had to be incredible, right? Well, sadly, Cyberpunk, and by proxy CDPR, is not a standalone example of this phenomenon. Several game studios seem to be treated as gods in the eyes of gamers. Rockstar's past successes have built them an army of fervent fanatics. COD's unheard of success back in the late 2000s and early 2010s took the gaming world by storm, and quickly a console war-like battle began to rage between steadfast Infinity Ward developers and the unwavering Treyarch fans, right between the two series of Modern Warfare and Black Ops. The list goes on, and I could sit here and list 20 other developers and their past successes and the fan bases that they've garnered. But seemingly anytime a studio produces a massive hit, or at least several good games within a decently, small time frame, gamers immediately latch on and believe that those studios are just infallible. But much like what we've seen with the Cyberpunk example above, this does not always seem to be the case. So now you might be asking yourself, well, why is this a thing? How can a studio go from churning out games that we cherish memories of, and we'll probably keep cherishing those memories till our deathbed, to suddenly putting out games that should have never ever seen the light of day? Well, today we'll explore just a few possible reasons and explanations why your favorite studio may not be all that it used to be, and why some of the games that they're putting out now will never live up to the games that they put out in the past. Now, obviously, guys, if you do end up enjoying this video, make sure to leave a like, and if you'd like to see more content like this, I try to put out a lot of gaming discussions and commentaries like this. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and if you would like to support the channel monetarily, make sure to click the join button to get exclusive perks while contributing to the channel monetarily. So with that all out of the way, guys, let's dive right in and find out, why is this happening? So the biggest, absolute largest contributor to this entire phenomenon is the simple fact that team members move on. So if you look at a development studio, much like a sports team, they operate in much the same way, right? The overall product that you see is not just because of the name of the studio, but rather a sum of all the work that was put in by all of its collective members. The product isn't made, like I said, by the company itself, but rather by each individual developer and artist and manager and everything like that work on each title. And just because the name on the building or the company remains the same and the name that appears on the boxes and the trailers remain the same does not mean any of the talent that make those titles does remain the same. So to continue on with that sports analogy, let's say your favorite team wins the Super Bowl. And right after that Super Bowl, obviously some players retire, some players get traded, maybe some players start to decline in their abilities after, or maybe the next season they get injured, so on and so forth. And the next year, or maybe, a couple years later, the team doesn't even make the playoffs. They don't even have, a winning record. They're not producing a good product on the field anymore. And sure, fans are mad. We all want to see our favorite team win. But at the end of the day, sports fans just seem to accept that a team can't win the Super Bowl or the World Series or the championship every single year. Because teams change, players move on, players join the team, and it's a very fluid industry. So why are games treated any differently when they work the exact same way? Churn is a massive thing in gaming, especially with the recent wave of layoffs and downsizing seen across the industry. After a big game is released, many employees leave the studio. Some use, the recent release or a recent project as a massive resume point and leave to better pastures, maybe for a better job or a promotion or more money at another studio. Others are just straight up fired or laid off once a huge project is over and the workload has fallen back to normal or below normal. And suddenly those same talented individuals who made the game that you absolutely love, like Skyrim or something like that, for example, are gone. They're no longer with the studio and no longer contributing to any future games there. So now the next game is made by largely a different team, even though the name on the package, the name on the building, everything like that still says CD Projekt Red or Treyarch. And to go along with that, managers, the biggest decision makers, also leave. Right, managers and creative directors and higher-ups and everything like that have massive impact on games, oftentimes tenfold what the individual developers do, including guiding direction of the game and, kind of influencing a lot of the decisions made in pre-production and planning for each game. When managers leave, sometimes their entire design philosophy could go out the door with them. So if they worked on a game in the past, future games from that company might never employ the same design philosophies or decisions going forward because that person or group of people have left. Suddenly, the studio that was heavily focusing on, a fan favorite game aspect, let's call it game aspect A, is now suddenly concentrating their efforts on a lesser received aspect B because the new managers that replace them just feel like focusing on those instead. Right? No two people are the same, and obviously that can't be felt any more heavily than in game development. The team that created the game you really love is likely hardly intact by the time that next game comes around. So if you're expecting an identical game or a game on the exact same level as one made 5 or 10 years back, you're going to be sorely mistaken. And even though some higher-ups don't leave and may maintain certain ideations or philosophies across the company, and that may trickle down into each new game's development, it doesn't mean that every game can match in direction or quality. And, above, whenever we use the sports analogy, we also have to take in quality of workers as well. We've talked a lot about how ideas can leave a company whenever workers leave, but we haven't even touched on the fact that skill sets can change. There's the very big possibility that the new wave of workers that come in to work on the next game might not be as skilled in certain areas that the last team was. Maybe the art team isn't as inventive or as creative as those that left, or the programmers maybe aren't as savvy and aren't able to optimize the game as well, or set up systems as well and stuff like that. The UI UX team leaves and suddenly the menus for the next game don't look as crisp and aren't as easy to navigate. No two people have the same skill set, and obviously teams can get better on the flip side of that, but sometimes teams just get worse in terms of skills over time as the more skilled people tend to leave and backfills just can't muster up. So the next massive reason why some games just aren't as great as a studio's previous ones is that sadly the games industry is changing. Now, obviously, video games have always kind of been a for-profit business, right? Even though artistic expression and passion is a huge part of the process, for several decades now, games have become more and more and more of a business and are, let's face it, primarily created to make someone somewhere money. The ratio, however, of making a good product or making something that you're really artistically invested in versus just making something that prints money, however, is starting to skew towards the latter. Games are starting to be built profit first, quality second, and it's really starting to show. Game systems that used to be made to engage the user for most fun, if you look at a lot of the games that you're probably remembering in your wave of nostalgia, some of those systems were made just to be fun, right? If back in the day, if you just made a fun game, you would sell more copies and therefore more money would be pouring in. However, with the use of data analytics and marketing analytics and everything like that, now systems are just simply finely tuned to hit certain KPIs or certain metrics and push people towards stuff like in-game shops. Right, we've seen this, and I've talked about this for an entire hour in a previous video, but skill-based matchmaking or engagement-optimized matchmaking in Call of Duty, right? That was strictly put into the game because they felt it made them more money. It grew their certain KPI numbers, their average users, or whatever, the case may be, and so they implemented that. It wasn't because they thought it would make it fun. Nobody thinks that that would be more fun. They just think new players will hang around more and they'll make more money, and that's all they really care about. And like I mentioned before, shops are now in every game, right? That doesn't make games fun. Maybe some games benefit from some cool cosmetics or stuff like that, but by and large, they're all just put in there so that you feel forced or incentivized to put some money into the game and line their pockets further. We see stuff like daily challenges being injected into every single game that don't need it, not because they're fun, not because they make the games better as a whole, just because it improves player retention, a KPI that every investor is going to want to see for every new game. And to kind of tie into that as well, that's why you see so many games nowadays trying to adopt the live service model, because that keeps players coming back and keeps players spending more money. Suddenly, game companies are no longer content just getting your $60 or $70 out of you one time. They want that $60 or $70 and then $10 here, $5 here, $20 here, $15 for the battle pass every 2 months. Stuff like that. They've learned that they could get so much more money out of you, and they will not be content until they do so. And that kind of means that any games that don't utilize these max efficiency money-making algorithms are kind of disincentivized and left on the chopping room floor. If you're a CEO, right, making decisions for these companies, and somebody brings you two game ideas. One is a classic early 2000s game that's really just a fun little platformer that people will enjoy for 10 hours and put down, or a massive live service game that you could milk hundreds, if not thousands of dollars out of each player over the course of the next 4 years. What are you going to pick whenever you know you have to please shareholders, right? It just, games that don't churn out money like these money printing algorithm games, they're just disincentivized. And that doesn't mean they don't still come out, but they're not going to come out as often, especially not from large corporations or large companies that make the games that we used to love, the kind of companies that I'm referencing in this video. This can then tend to lead to a lack of identity or a studio's special touch that we used to love, because they all have to be profit-minded and start to use proven cash methods. They start all funneling down the same path. And that leads me to my next point. Games nowadays just try to imitate whatever practice is hot and whatever practice or feature is making the most money in other games. And the biggest perpetrator of this is Fortnite, right? Fortnite stormed onto the scene and set the precedent in so many different ways and has made billions and billions of dollars, and is an industry juggernaut. And obviously it has inspired dozens, if not hundreds, of trends across the gaming, the entire gaming scene, much to the detriment of a lot of games that try to shamelessly shoehorn those trends into their new games. Single player games are now being loaded with microtransactions and battle passes and other stuff that have no point being in single player games, but it worked for Fortnite, so we got to put it in our game. In-game shops are now just stacking the shelves, the virtual shelves, with setting breaking crossover skins. Call of Duty has, Godzilla and King Kong and Nicki Minaj and 21 Savage and those superheroes from The Boys running around every match because Fortnite did it and they made a lot of money doing something like that. So COD might as well try as well. And obviously, the biggest kind of thing that Fortnite pushed on everyone is kind of dying down now. But if you guys remember that kind of the era between 2018 to 2022, every game, every franchise tried to shoehorn in a battle royale mode. Entire new games were kind of scrapped on the cutting room floor and completely reworked to be a battle royale game because studios wanted to milk that success of Fortnite, right? Famously, Black Ops 4 was kind of carcassed almost, entirely the whole way through development because higher-ups wanted them to add a battle royale. They wanted to add Blackout, which we end up getting with Black Ops 4. So the campaign was shelved, a couple other things were shelved, some corners were cut, and devs worked, 18 hours a day to try to shoehorn in that battle royale mode. Battlefield had a horrendous battle royale mode. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So games that used to have their own special identity, they were, beloved by their fan base because certain ways they did things, now just kind of threw those identities to the ground and just said, well, I want to do what he's doing. And that kind of leads to a lot of conglomerization across the industry and, does not lead to anything good. Studios, once again, known for their love and care that's putting into their games, are suddenly becoming lifeless. Almost cold and heartless development practices that they're implementing and, cold and lifeless game design just in the name of higher profits. Especially studios that kind of, started out small or were almost an indie studio when their first game was released, but now they're expanding. Now they have investors. Now they maybe went public or were bought out by a big company. And now they have to adopt those profit-driven approaches. So maybe the first one or two games that they put out were, finely crafted and made with love and obviously made to make some money, but money wasn't the first thing in mind. Well, as time goes on, maybe they got some success from that. Again, they got bought out, they have investors, they went public, whatever the case may be. Now future games won't be like that. Something like Minecraft, I'm wondering if future games from Mojang just, become increasingly more heartless and less impactful on the game genre as a whole, because now they're a massive company instead of just a couple people, coding a game in indie studio. And don't get me wrong, this is an entire industry-wide issue, whether they be new companies that are starting up, companies that we used to love but now disappoint us every release. I'll probably go into that side of things in a whole other video and probably have another, 20, 30-minute rant on that to talk about later. But suffice it to say, one of the reasons why games just aren't as great as they used to is because the industry itself is not as great as it used to. Individuality and expression and everything like that is kind of being chucked to the side in favor of the almighty dollar. And unfortunately, this is not a trend that I see stopping anytime soon. Games are making more money than they ever have, and that's a year-over-year increase. And so it's not going to stop, right? Some certain studios may stick to their guns and try making, classic, heartfelt, love poured into every line of code type games. But for the most part, they're going to start putting microtransactions everywhere they can and hitting KPIs and just slashing game systems that used to be fun because they don't make any money, stuff like that. And finally, one of the last reasons that it seems that maybe game studios that used to have a great reputation are now failing is because games have evolved. And that kind of ties into what we just talked about. But, game systems that seem deep or interesting or new and novel kind of experiences now might seem dull and non-engaging if they were to put it into a game nowadays. We talk constantly about how nostalgia glasses are real, rose-tinted glasses, right? When you look back at old games that, at the time were really fun, we have to break it to ourselves that maybe if they made those same games nowadays, we wouldn't enjoy it as much. And so maybe game studios are trying their same tricks that they used to, but just we've grown out of it. We can see behind the curtain, so to speak. And as games have evolved, it's just not as impressive as it was 10 or 15 years ago. The standard for what is good has gone up drastically. Video games, while we've had some definite stinkers the last couple of years, the standard for a good video game has gone up and up. Something that, now we kind of look down on and say, oh, this only has 50 hours of gameplay, or, the world is only this big, would have been just mind-blowing even 10 years ago. Right? So I just think a lot of it is as we grow up, we become more jaded, and the industry as a whole, and, with social media and everything, everyone's expectations have just gone through the roof, and we start looking down our nose at stuff that we would have been in awe of just a few short years ago. And also, as games have become more complex and realistic, dev time has unfortunately had to expand. And this leads to stuff like crunch time, rushing or delaying of games that kind of impact the quality, plus longer time between games exacerbates that churn issue that I mentioned above, right? Games tend to lose their identity, or at least the skilled workers that are working on them. Before, you might have a lot of the same team make two games back to back because they were released 2 years from one another, right? A lot less opportunity for churn and people getting fired or quitting or leaving or what have you. But now when games take 10 or 11, 12, 13 years to make, in the case of like GTA 6, how many people do you think are working on GTA 6 now that worked on GTA 4 or GTA 5? Probably very few. I would argue probably less than two handfuls of people are working on those games still. So a lot of the people that knew what worked back then just aren't working because games now take so much longer and so much more effort to make than they did back then. And also putting the same level of care or world building that we remember from old games into these larger, more visually stunning open worlds isn't quite as easy, right? If you look back at a lot of the open worlds or a lot of just the video game, environments in general from the early 2000s or late 2000s, early 2010s, stuff like that, there's a lot less detail. So they were able to incorporate maybe more environmental storytelling or make each location seem a little more unique. Stuff like that. There was a lot more time to put in nice little touches. Now, with the scope of games increasing year over year over year, it's a lot harder to put those nice little finishing touches on stuff. And again, we're already dealing with much more expanded development time. Going in and, putting in the same level of detail to much bigger games that they used to in much smaller and simplistic games back in the day would be near impossible. And I know some people are already talking about using AI to accomplish stuff like this to, kind of take away some of the man hours, but it's still an almost insurmountable task. So as the scope of games increases, we can't expect that same level of care or artistic expression, if that's a good term, that we saw back in the day when the scope of games was smaller. Also, some studios' identities are just, let's face it, tied to an era of gaming that has come and gone. Some studios are known for creating a very specific type of game or a very specific type of vibe in those games that is just frankly no longer in fashion. So they either don't benefit from creating those same ones, or they do still try to create it, but it isn't as well received by the community, even those that enjoyed the previous games that were set up that way. And as the gaming landscape shifts and studios and their mantras and everything like that are left in the dust as, these new gaming trends continue to pop up, stuff like Fortnite and now Helldivers and all these other games that are coming out that are kind of, breaking the scene and reinventing stuff. A lot of old practices and even genres of games have been completely defunct. And then finally, teams can either adapt or run into the issues mentioned above and just absolutely stay stuck in the past sometimes as well. And, when viewed with today's lenses, those stuck in the past, they could put out games that just look rough when compared to their counterparts throughout the industry. So that about wraps it up, guys. I didn't want to make too long of a video and deep dive into all of these points, but I might make separate videos later on, again, maybe expanding on some of these. But, suffice to say, a lot of the game studios that we really applaud and, look back on fondly, it's not the same people making the decisions. It's not the same people typing the code. It's not the same artists, building character models and building the open worlds that we used to love. And I see this especially with like Bethesda. They still try maybe to adhere to those same values, but as the industry changes and as their physical teams change, they just can't keep up, right? And that's why we may never see another game like Skyrim again. We may never see a game like the original Modern Warfare 2, right? The landscape has just changed, and a lot of those same people that made those games are no longer on the team before, along with all their skill sets, their ideologies, their, artistic expressions, everything like that. And so a lot of times, we look at a development studio and instantly see their past work and assume that their current or future work will look the exact same. And I hate to break it to you guys, but that's just not the case. So we need to stop fanboying over Treyarch, or need to stop fanboying over CD Projekt Red or any of these game development studios, and just start looking at games for what they are. Judge each game based on its own merit and stop saying, wait, this is the studio that brought us, because likely it's really not. It is not the same studio that brought you the games that you used to love, and it is not the same games industry as, when the last game that you love came out. So enough of me rambling on. I want to hear you guys' thoughts. Let me know down below what you think and what your thoughts are, and maybe even some games that have come out that have really disappointed you from studios that you used to absolutely love. I know myself, I was a little underwhelmed with Starfield. I didn't hate it by any means. I still put several dozen hours into the game. I never beat it though, because I didn't get lost in the world like I did back with Skyrim. And again, that could be a whole nother video as well, but suffice to say, just, that was a game that came out that I fell into that same trap. I love Bethesda games, and so I figured anything they put out, I would immediately love, and was kind of conked over the head with, reality, so to speak. So, yeah, definitely let me know your thoughts down below, and if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. It helps others find the channel, and we're still trying to get to 1,000 subs here, and other than that, guys, if you would like to see more content like this, make sure you're subscribed. Until the next time, you guys have a good one.